Welcome to Interviews with Innocence, a podcast about spirituality, consciousness, and exploring the wisdom our children bring into this world. I believe that our very young children are our greatest teachers. After all, they're the masters of living in the present moment, bubbling in unconditional love, enjoying the messiness of life, and curious about the universe in all its dimensions. The pure essence that young children exhibit lives within all of us. My hope is that these interviews will help us discover, embrace, and connect with the sacred core of childhood that resides within each of our hearts. I am your host, Marla Hughes. I am so excited to welcome Dr. Raymond Moody back to the show today. Dr. Moody is a world-renowned scholar, lecturer, and researcher, and is widely recognized as the leading authority on near-death experiences, as he coined the term NDE. He is the best-selling author of many books, including Life After Life, Glimpses of Eternity, The Light Beyond, and Coming Back. Today, we're going to continue our conversation about Raymond's most recent book, God is Bigger Than the Bible. Welcome back, Raymond.
Thank you so much, Marla. It's always good to be with you.
Yeah, it's so great to see you again. So I'd like to go back just a minute, something in the book that I read that George Richie said, speaking of his NDE and how he explained it. This just really touched me. And it said, it's like you're being fiercely hypnotized. And I feel that sometimes when I'm meditating, but not even close to that, but fiercely hypnotized. That is just, wow, those words. And so what is your relationship with God? How did you, without reading the Bible, how did it evolve? And and your personal experiences.
Yeah, when people ask me, do you believe that God exists? I say, absolutely not. Going on to explain that I, Raymond Moody, am a very limited human being, and that any belief I could formulate about God would be off base. And secondly, if you think about that, do you believe that God exists? The emphasis of the sentence falls on the word exist, right?
Right.
And so what I say, I taught logic, and so I could sit here an hour take, but I could go through and I could explain to you what the concept of existence is, or even how to symbolize it. But when it comes to God, I give up. I think that God is greater than existence itself. When people are trying to, prove whether or not God exists, what they're trying to do is to take a very limited human concept and draw it as a circle around God. But that doesn't work. What I say is, I have a relationship with God. See that? I give up on the abstract arguments, but I know I have a relationship with God. And in terms of what George was saying about the fiercely hypnotized, the first time I ever had to my conscious awareness, a really, really intense encounter with God. I think it was June of 1991, as I recall. And I was just I wasn't suicidal because I knew that, that doesn't work. And so I was just, what am I going to do? I was just devastated terribly. And so, for want of a better term, God came. I know this, there's no way to describe this. Okay. Anybody who has had this experience will tell you this. But suddenly I was overwhelmed by the presence of God, and this infinitely compassionate and loving and knowing presence came with complete understanding. I used to sort of think religious people were pretty ridiculous for saying, well, you got to bow down to God. From my point of view, that's egomania, right? Like that God is going to be what? Wanting to us to bow down to God, or, or are we trying to get on the good side of God by I just thought it was ridiculous. But this experience I had, I got that because you can't stand up. It's not that I wanted to kneel down. It's just like your body goes into like soup. And I just collapsed to the floor. It was just this amazing experience of the presence of this amazing love and compassion and understanding and humor at the same time. I mean, and I had to laugh some of the observations. And so it was just amazing. It really was. And it changed my life totally. And it didn't make everything all light and us all the time. Life is struggle and life is tough, but that was just at that point. I can't remember. I had been on board with God for some years before that, I think, but that was it, that personal direct experience. And George said about that being fiercely hypnotized. What George was saying with the end of his experience, he wanted to stay, right? So he was fighting to be in this light, but he said that he said it's like you're being fiercely hypnotized. You just go and you collapse into this little heap. And he was then back in his body. And so I know exactly that feeling. It's just, it's a feeling you would want to have forever. If
I know.
he had said, well, you can just stay in this state right now. You're in forever if you want to. I said, yeah. Let me sign.
Yes,
Pretty
yes.
amazing.
What a beautiful thing to look forward to. And I know you've said that you pray a lot, and I love when you say surrender is the most powerful prayer. That,
That again is what George Richie told me, and
right.
I had learned it by myself. Just what I tend to do is I tend to get myself into all these incomprehensive difficulties, and then I'm trying to figure out what to do. And oh my God, man. And then finally it occurs to me, oh, maybe I should pray about this, right? And then you just
Right,
surrender.
right.
All right, I give it over to you, and then it just disappears. And so I had an experience like that one day, and a couple of days later, I was seeing George again, and I explained that event to him, and he said, I remember his smile as he said, surrender is the most powerful prayer. And it
Wow.
is. Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of George again, talking about chapter 7, God and knowledge,
Yeah.
and seeing the hall of knowledge, and that he learned, as many have said, that we continue to learn through eternity. I know both you and I are
Yeah.
very excited
Yeah.
about that.
That's
But
right.
can you elaborate just about that? Elaborate, but briefly.
Yes, I will. And I will say this, that, it's like a lot of people use God so they won't have to learn anything else, right? You don't have to learn
Mhm.
about evolution because God is in the Bible that way. Well, that's just laziness. God is no excuse for ignorance, is what I say. And a lot of the people who've had these extremely lengthy cardiac arrests have told me that above and beyond seeing your body there and all this physical world, that a lot of people get this glimpse into what appears to be an institution of higher learning. I've heard this from I don't know how many people. And George said, if you try to imagine Caltech and MIT and Harvard and Yale and Princeton and all of them rolled up into one, he said, you can't even get an halfway sense of what this is like, that people
Right.
there are just pursuing knowledge. And he said there was one area of this was kind of like a library, for want of a better term. And he said, he was in one section of this library that consisted of the holy books of the universe.
Mm. Oh, wow. Wow. And chapter 8, talking about creation and creativity. And to quote, the flow of creativity is one of the most exhilarating, joyous experiences of life. And one reason I bring this up is that, once again, learning let's say, outside of the Bible, about God, that so many artists, I mean, Dr. Tony Sikora, who is now a pianist, and even I'll put him along with Mozart.
That's right.
But they state that their music, I mean, after Tony learned how to play music, but like that it came from God. It's
Yes.
this flow. You hear this about contemplative, when people have contemplative practices a lot, and just the flow and the creativity. And I think that in itself, those mystical experiences, what you were just talking about for yourself, it once again is one more way we can really learn so much about God.
Yeah. The one way this came up, I was amused some years ago when this creationist group filed a federal suit. They were going to try to get the biblical creationism taught along in science courses alongside the theory of evolution in public schools. And the judge, who was just and conservative himself, kind of laughed him out of court. And it's like, to me, I am a creationist too, but what I think is that those biblical creationists don't go far enough. They say, oh, God created the world in 7 days and 6 days and rested on the seventh. I say God is creating everything all the time. Well, you
Yeah.
and I are going through it. All this is God's creation. And he didn't just create this thing and back off of it. And,
Yes.
I see very much, to me, the process of creativity is a kind of spiritual and mystical experience in itself. And as egomaniacal as this may seem, when I'm doing my writing, which I love doing, I'm always sort of asking God for what's the better word for that? I mean, I just pray throughout the writing process. And I've heard so many artists who tell me that, they say, Raymond, this doesn't come from me. I just open up and, it comes from somewhere else. And I have had that experience, as I'm sure many people listening to this right now have. And I think God kind of meets us halfway in creativity.
So I think this brings the conversation also to your chapter about nonsense.
Yeah.
And for listeners, I had another interview with Raymond, about his book about nonsense. But why I find this so interesting is, I think this, and you tell me if you feel this way, of course, but it kind of wraps up what we're talking about in the sense of, as you use the language, unintelligible
Yeah.
nonsense, and so much of that's been used, historically, and even today, in children's stories and parables and chanting and religious, rituals, the flow, like we were just talking about a bit ago. And now, however, this unintelligible nonsense, it's not really unintelligible anymore, because
Yeah.
there's tens of millions of people talking about trying to talk about their ineffable descriptions of the afterlife, and we just can't ignore it anymore.
It's
And it's such,
absolutely.
yeah, a beautiful way to learn once again about God. So
Yeah.
can you talk about that?
I can, because, as you know, Marla, this is really my favorite subject and has been since I was a kid. Literally, I was a reader of Dr. Seuss and Lewis Carroll, and at the same time I was studying astronomy, and I realized the connection. Because this thing we're living in is nonsense. Everybody's
Yes.
had that thought about how big is it, right? Well, your mind races out to the wall, but then you say, just a minute here, doesn't there have to be something on the other side of a wall? And so then you say the only other option seems to be that it goes on forever and ever, but that doesn't make sense either. So when I was having these realizations at about the age of 7 or 8, I was really into Dr. Seuss and Lewis Carroll, and I thought, well, that's just fine. The fact is we're living in a world of nonsense. But, one of the things, and listen, folks, there's not, of all the stuff I've learned all of my life, I think this is the single most important thing I have discovered, and that is that we, almost all of us, have a sort of collective cognitive flaw that's in our minds, and it prevents us from thinking rationally about the afterlife and about a lot of other things. And it's just a simple cognitive flaw that can be corrected immediately, and except that there's a psychological barricade to it. And this is where it comes from. Number one, we love nonsense. Dr. Seuss's books, hold on to your hat, have sold over 600 million copies around the world. Who knows how many Lewis Carroll's books sold? And I mean, it's an enormously important thing to us. If you're from the 50s, you remember doo-wop songs, which combine nonsense with meaningful parts like sha-na-na-na-na, get a job. Or if you're into jazz, Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald and scat singing, which is nonsense syllables. Or if you are into glossolalia and the spiritual quest, which is nonsense syllables uttered spontaneously with no meaningful combinations or grammatical form, and this speaking in unknown tongues, as it's called. And where as I've tried it myself, you don't have to be in a religion or a church, but you just keep doing it, and you get in this amazing ecstatic state. It's really astonishing. Or koans, if you're into that. What is the sound of one hand clapping? Which is a nonsense question, right? But the student, by keeping on thinking about it, eventually is transported over to a non-logical frame of consciousness. So what we need to do is we need to realize that nonsense itself has structure and effects. Most people think if this is the level of ordinary meaningful language, wouldn't everybody agree probably that nonsense is down here somewhere, right? It's sublingual. But just by very simple thinking, you can see for yourself that actually nonsense is up here. It's actually a more complicated level of language than ordinary meaningful language. And what the point that I'm making in this book is that, these people who say, oh, everything is literal, that the Bible is literal, meaning that's all there is to it. What a ridiculous thing that human beings are going to try to confine God to a literal mode of language. And I'd say that God is talking to us in nonsense all the time.
So do you think that the ineffable way that people just find it so incredibly hard or almost impossible to describe their experiences after an NDE,
That's right.
that there are those so many now that we can't just throw them away as nonsense, or it doesn't make sense?
That is really true.
It's beginning to make sense.
Marla, that is true. As much as most people dislike the word nonsense, even then, without realizing the connection, they love nonsense, right?
Right.
And what people don't realize is that what is nonsense in one year can make sense in another year. This, by the way, is a very common phenomenon in science. Nonsense is what we call a stopgap or a placeholder in science. Things we hold on to in the anticipation that eventually we'll make sense of them. The best example these days is the fact that the most powerful explanatory theories ever devised are the general theory of relativity and the quantum theory. But the trouble is that, as physicists will tell you, when you try to integrate those two sets of equations, the outcome is just nonsensical. It doesn't make any sense. So that's how nonsense is involved in science.
If you would like to learn more about the chapter of nonsense in this book, I encourage you to go back and listen to my previous interview with Raymond. We talked about his other book, Making Sense of Nonsense, The Logical Bridge Between Science and Spirituality.
Well, Raymond, we should probably wrap it up. We could talk
Yeah.
all day,
Yeah.
but thank you so
Thank
so
you
much.
so much, Marla. And
You're welcome. And is there anything that you'd like to say also about the book that I didn't? I know I didn't cover every chapter, but
well, God is bigger than the Bible. I first of all, I want to thank so much to everybody listening in and watching this. And, if I am just so interested in my new book, God is bigger than the Bible. This is something I've been working on for decades, really. And I would really like to hear what people have to say about it. The book is available on Amazon. And, I would just love to hear anybody who wants to comment on it. It may be controversial to some, but I think it's a new way of looking at God. If you love God but you don't care anything about religion, this is the book for you. And
yeah,
and
absolutely.
also then after reading that book, you might want to join my collective study where we're all going to this is like everybody getting together in a sort of corporate endeavor and recharging our minds, reframing our minds to think in a whole new rational way about the biggest question of existence, whether are we, do we live after we die?
Yeah. Wow. Well, Raymond, thank you so much. And if people
You
want to
know,
reach out to you with comments and questions, I know you have lifeafterlife.com.
that's right.
And is that the best
That's
way
the
to
best
reach?
way, lifeafterlife.com. And
Okay,
I
great.
will, we will respond to all queries.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. And thanks to Carter, wherever he went, that he set all this up for you. And you have a wonderful rest of your day. You've given us
You
a
too,
lot to think
Marla.
about.
And
Okay.
again, thank you, Marla, and thanks to all the people watching in too. It's just really that you would sit here and listen to me talking about this stuff is just very inspiring. So I am so grateful to everybody who, will listen.
Well, Raymond, thank you. It's truly always an honor to have you.
Likewise, Marla. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening in today. If you want to learn more about the show, you can find us at interviewswithinnocence.com and on Facebook or Instagram at Interviews with Innocence. Please write me a message, tell me what you liked, and let me know what else you would like to hear. I would love to hear from you. And if you liked what you heard, please leave us an iTunes rating and review. It helps other listeners find the show. Thank you.